Hi, Geshe.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you again. We are so very lucky to have these teachings. We are very fortunate to have met with one another and have this sangha of people who are interested in this precious teaching. Another way of showing our appreciation is to donate if you can and wish to do so, generating generosity and showing our appreciation to this precious teaching and this excellent teacher. Thank you, Geshe. I also would like to thank Dalit for hosting the meeting. Thank you, Dalit, so very much. Geshe, it's yours.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Let's start then, as usual, as we usually do, with some breathing meditation and then setting the motivation. And as I said before, please make an effort to not just go through the motions, but kind of adopt a beginner's mind, as if you were to do it the first time with the same degree of attention. Okay, so let's start with some breathing. And then in the space in front of you, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni, who's inseparable from your Lama. It's an embodiment of the Dharma. And surrounding the Buddha, the masters of India, the great accomplished masters, especially of the Nalanda tradition, Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Bhavaviveka, Buddhapalita, and so forth. Inspiring us with their presence. Supporting us and showing us that we can reach the same level of realization ourselves that they have attained. And then visualize the great masters of Tibet, surrounding the Buddha. And then those of other traditions. Try to just feel their inspiring presence, even if they don't appear clearly. And of course, remember that they're all one nature with your Lama. And surrounding ourselves in the front visualization are all sentient beings who are the reason for our Dhamma practice. Who are experiencing endless sufferings. Just due to the fact that they have this limited body, fragile mind. Not knowing where to find satisfaction and lasting happiness. Instead, repeatedly creating the causes for more suffering. First, generate affectionate love, that is feeling of closeness, a feeling of acceptance, even of sentient beings' faults. Connecting to their actual nature of the mind, that pure mind that each and every sentient being has. And affectionate love gives way to great compassion. That is a mind which wishes for all sentient beings to be free from their misery, their pain, and that which causes those sufferings. And more than that, the wish, may I be able to protect them from all their unwanted experiences, the causes of those. And as this wish grows stronger, it turns into the special altruistic attitude, determination. I'll do whatever I can, however long it takes, to work towards leading sentient beings towards a state of liberation. Since I can do so effectively only once I become a Buddha, therefore generate sincere aspiration, or even more so the determination I will become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. It's with this motivation that I will also study Chandrakirti's text today once again. Thinking, may this become a cause for me to attain the state of a Buddha. And then without letting go of your motivation, we recite the prayers together. Go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, and practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then specifically directed at the front visualizations, front visualization of Buddha, great masters. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. And now again, what I'd like you to do this coming week. Focus, of course, on generating bodhicitta the way we did it just now, going through the steps, starting in the morning, of course, and then throughout the day to refresh it again and again. But while we're doing that, to also continue with what we started last week, to consider our relationship with other people, to watch our mind, how to relate to the people we're in touch with on a daily basis, contact with, we talk to, we have to be around, we like to be around. Do we classify them? Well, first of all, spontaneously into these 3 categories. Of course, there are more categories if you look closer, but in general, it's pretty much those you like, those you don't like, and the rest you don't care. And not just becoming aware how we have that natural tendency to put people in these different categories, but also how we hold on to it, possibly. And I also ask you to be specifically aware of the person you've got a hard time with, like a person you don't like much. And I think oftentimes we're too deeply involved. So sometimes it's possibly a family member or someone we work with. So there seems to be our relationship being one of inherent closeness, like they're inherently my relative. This is inherently someone I'm working with. So to understand, this is just a temporary state. Inherently in the sense, well, it could usually rise the sense that they're truly my brother, truly my sister, my colleague, and so forth. Well, that gives rise to a sense that always will be. But of course, that's not true. And here it's helpful to consider past and future lives. I mean, however hard it may be for us, the idea of past and future lives, but it makes so much more sense. And to allow the possibility in that, well, if we have had previous lives and we will have in the future, well, these people who are really close to me because of relationship or being relatives, well, it's just for this lifetime. And to get a bit of a healthy distance. So closeness, of course, if it's love and compassion based on an understanding of reality and so forth, it's totally, well, it's desirable to have that kind of closeness. But oftentimes it's a different times. It's kind of a distorted closeness, as in like whatever they do really bothers me. So a closeness in the sense I have no distance. If I don't like that person much, and whatever they do, it gets me, it makes me so angry. What, like, it's just the way they look at me, the things they do sometimes. So I'm much more likely to get angry when they do certain things rather than someone I don't know. So there's this, it's too close to me. So to try and find more of a distance towards that person, kind of like see them as these people who we don't know. I mean, if we haven't known them before, and in the future there'll be times when we won't know them. So to kind of move them further away, not in an unhealthy and indifferent way, but just to see them more objectively. And the same is true for those we're really attached to. Again, kind of see them more in an objective way, as in like, well, they were strangers before, there will be again, and just kind of making them part of this group of people who were open towards, as in like open to get to know, open to benefit, possibly work towards their benefit, kind of dedicating our life towards them, but kind of removing that sense of being so close in the way, like emotionally so close, whether it's a positive or, well, whether it's not a positive emotion, whether it's attachment or anger. Okay, so for this week, we'll continue doing this, our relationship with other people. Okay. All right. Well, also what I'd like to do, what I want to start with is answering some questions that I received. One question came from Kelsang, very good question, in the form of a debate. The question concerns selflessness, what we've discussed so far about how does the I exist, this analysis we engaged in. Well, if the I exists the way it appears to us as like an inherent, objective, objectively existent, inherently, intrinsically existent I, then there's only two possibilities. Either it exists as one with the aggregates or different from the aggregates. And so in that context, we discussed what are the logical absurdities if the I were one of the aggregates, such as the mind. The argument was, well, some philosophers would say, since the main aggregate, it kind of makes sense. If the I were one of the aggregates, it could really just be the mental consciousness. And so there's some philosophers, other than the Prasangika philosopher, who would say, well, yeah, the mental consciousness, that is the I. But the problem then is, as one of the contradictions that would arise, assuming this, well, if something happens to the body, how do you account for that? If someone looks at me, well, they're not looking at my mind. If they, if I talk about I'm sick, when I just mean my body, it no longer makes any sense. So kind of conventional ways of relating to the body, because that's really important. We're not going against conventions. Of course, there's some wrong conventions, of course. But not all conventions are wrong. I mean, certain wrong conventions, for instance, the self-existing inherently. Well, that is not a correct convention. But other than that, that this is me, this is another person, someone looks at me because they look at my body. Well, that is a convention. It's not contradictory in any way. All right. So anyway, the argument being, how can you then still use this phrase, they looked at me, when in actuality, they don't look at my mind, but at my body. And so Kelsang was arguing, well, if that's your argument, how about you're saying, and this is a correct way of speaking, someone spilled ketchup, tomato sauce on me, when actually they spell it on my shirt, but we can still say they spelled it on me. Does that by extension mean, well, that actually also my shirt should be part of the I, right? If the argument is, as previously said, well, the mental consciousness is not the I, because then I could no longer say this person has looked at me when I look at my body. Well, then we could no longer say this person spilled ketchup on me. If my t-shirt wasn't part of this I, the shirt that I'm wearing, if that wasn't part of the I, then I could no longer say someone spilled ketchup on me. Or the other example she gives is, well, as I pulled out of my driveway, he hit me with his car as I pulled out of my driveway. So by implication, you pull out of your driveway, you're not walking, you're in a car. So as I pulled out of my driveway, he hit me with his car. So that means actually you were in the car, yes, but what was hit was actually the car. Very good argument. So does that mean my t-shirt is also part of the I, and my car is part of the I, right? That's her argument. Very good argument. But actually, I believe that this is a way of it's like a slightly imprecise way. I mean, it's not a very precise way of talking, because if I were to ask, they spelled ketchup right on you, the answer is, well, on my shirt, right? So you kind of wouldn't say, well, yeah, not directly on me, but on my shirt. So you do distinguish. You say, well, yeah, my shirt got dirty. But if it were on your body, you wouldn't say, oh, no, it wasn't spelled on me, it was on my body. You don't draw that distinction, right? You wouldn't say, if really the I was the mind, and someone, I don't know, spilled some food on you, you don't say, oh, no, it wasn't spilled on me, but it was spilled on my body. But with the shirt, if I ask, oh, on you directly? Well, no, actually just on my shirt. Or with the car, if you say, well, this person hit me as I was pulling out. Oh, they hit you? Well, did you get injured? And in response, well, no, it was my car. I mean, there's some damage. The car was damaged, but I wasn't injured. So I believe we do talk like that, but it kind of is, it's obvious. Well, obvious, maybe not obvious. You may ask, did you get injured? And then you specify what it actually meant. But I think it's just not being specific enough. And as I said, anyway, when you ask, well, did you get injured? Did someone spill, did they spill something on you? Did they soil you, as in like your skin or whatever? You specify, oh no, yes or no. And again, you would say, yes, they did spoil. I mean, they did, I don't know, smear me with color or something, and not on my body. So I wasn't smeared with color, but my body. Because if the I were the mental consciousness, you have to be just as precise, saying, well, it's actually my mental consciousness. It's actually my body that was hit, not me, right? If the I wasn't, okay. Anyway, so please, Kelsey, continue the debate. If there's something, you've got time to think about it, of course. Maybe you've got something to respond to this. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a very good argument. I've never heard this. So yeah, maybe there's some response you can come up with for next time. Okay, and then Jimmy also sent me a question too, in fact. So he writes that with regard to bodhicitta, now I've stressed it over and over again, although it's not really part of this class so much, but well, generating the mind of enlightenment. And he says, well, oftentimes they're just plain statements made by the Lama or teacher saying like, it is so, you better believe it, generate bodhicitta, it's good. So it's not very convincing, he says, for me, and he would prefer some reasoning. So for bodhicitta, it's a good idea. So he gives the example, well, for instance, if I eat a lot, I mean, like sometimes if I'm on vacation, I like to eat, and the whole day revolves around what food I'm going to eat. And when I'm so about just my mind just revolving around the food I eat, I find at some point the people surrounding me are people who are interested in food, and that's not always pleasant. I think that's how he put it. Or sometimes I'm totally involved in possibly if I'm angry with a person, kind of thinking about how can I harm this person, retaliate, take revenge or whatever. And so, and here I'm not reading everything, but that's what I think I remember. Yes, so start with the day with making plans to cause suffering to this person, to execute this plan. And eventually I'm involved. I'm sorry, I'm surrounded by people, when I act in that way, I'm surrounded by people who also want to harm me. So it seems to be, it comes back right away, and that's not something I like. So he's saying in the same way, if I generate bodhicitta, well, I'll eventually be surrounded also by people who do something similar, since that seems to be the case. If I think a lot about food, I'll be involved. I'll be surrounded by people who like a lot of food, or if I take revenge, if I try to harm others, I'm surrounded by those similar people. And since I don't want that, well, there's a good reason for me to refrain thinking only about food or only about harming others, and instead generate bodhicitta. Okay, that's this question. Now, my response would be, first of all, well, personally, I've not had that experience that a Lama just says, generate bodhicitta is good for you. I mean, I believe, wow, I mean, if you listen to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings, he always gives plenty of reasoning why bodhicitta is important, why we should generate it. And also my teachers, I mean, they would always, my lamas, my teachers, they would always talk about this. Well, I'm neither a lama nor a teacher, so I may have failed to do so, to actually talk about the importance of bodhicitta. But anyway, it's of course important to listen to qualified teachers, to real teachers and lamas. Of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings. And like I said, His Holiness always gives reasoning. And what's interesting, the reasoning you mention is a reasoning that concerns the I. So on one hand, we talk about bodhicitta, but we're doing it for ourselves in that case. And that's good. I'm not saying this is negative, because we should be realistic. Right now, we have self-centeredness. We can't just wish it away. We work towards becoming more compassionate and so forth, but let's be realistic and not work against our self-centeredness. To try and take the reasoning of bodhicitta because it's the right thing to do and so forth, and totally ignore the needs of our self-centeredness. We need to work with the self-centeredness. So in His Holiness often says, bodhicitta is so precious, because if we really want to be happy and we want to really have peace of mind, the answer is bodhicitta. We seek peace of mind, we seek satisfaction, we seek well-being, mental and physical well-being. Well, the answer is bodhicitta. So just as Jimmy has this idea of being surrounded by bodhisattvas, if we generate bodhicitta as one of the benefits, yeah, great, that's a great way to go about it. But another way to look at it, well, if you want to really feel well, and I thought I kind of mentioned it also towards the beginning of this course, saying that, well, I don't know, it feels fake right now to generate bodhicitta, but just keep doing it and see how you feel. See that if you have a problem, when you really suffer, when things really go wrong, to remind yourself, oh, but I'm working for the welfare of all sentient beings. Oh, but that's my real purpose in life. And even if it's just going through the motion, like even if it's not like deeply felt, well, it may not be in that moment. See whether it gives some relief. It's okay. It's all right. So that shows, actually, if you feel that relief, and you're very likely to have that relief, that there's something more important than whatever went wrong, which is the welfare of all sentient beings. So in that sense, it gives you right away peace of mind. So just for our own peace of mind, our own well-being, of course, it benefits others too. So it benefits us, it benefits others. But let's be realistic, like I said, it really benefits us big time. There is no better way than to have real peace of mind. Why? Because it's the opposite of self-centeredness, and all our trouble comes from self-centeredness. That's our problem. So therefore, I would suggest to listen to more of these reasonings given by His Holiness, by a true practitioner. I mean, like someone who's, well, a true Buddha, and if not a Buddha, highly advanced Bodhisattva. So the point is, therefore, there are all these reasonings, but they concern ourselves first. And so therefore, well, it's important to consider the needs of the self-centeredness, and as His Holiness would then say, be wisely selfish. Feed into the self-centered mind, not for it to increase, but our self-centered minds, which governs our actions day by day, to not go against it, so that one day we just leave all this practice of bodhicitta because our self-centeredness can no longer stand it, but feed the need of our self-centeredness, and in that way, it's actually getting reduced. That altruistic attitude becomes stronger, and in that way, the self-centeredness will naturally subside, grow weaker, at least initially, and then eventually, of course, we can overcome it. So that's one aspect, but also about generating bodhicitta and then wishing for bodhisattvas to be around. Well, actually, when you generate bodhicitta, if it's real bodhicitta, you're not seeking the presence of bodhisattvas. You actually, and this is in the long term, you will actually seek the presence of the most difficult and the most annoying people, because they need the help of a bodhisattva most. So we had this discussion today as part of Yanden Rinpoche's teachings, during which someone asked, well, what about being reborn again in the human realm? Wouldn't we want to be reborn in Amitabha, like a pure realm, for instance? And actually, and here on the basis of a bodhisattva, why would a bodhisattva be reborn in the human realm and not in the pure realm? Well, someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama doesn't talk about being reborn in the pure realm much, because as the person who His Holiness is, he likes to be reborn where it's most difficult. And so oftentimes when you see the lamas, they're surrounded by people who are, well, they can be quite difficult oftentimes, not all of them, and the lamas don't mind. They're happy to be in the presence of these beings. As the story goes of Atisha, he purposely surrounded himself by a person who was very angry with Atisha all the time, would always criticize him, because it gave him the opportunity, of course, to practice patience and being happy to benefit that person. I mean, benefiting him with his patience and his own example. So therefore, actually, eventually, you don't seek the presence of bodhisattvas. You want to be surrounded by difficult people. Anyway, that was the first part of your question, Jimmy's question, and I'll continue next time with the rest of it. There's a little bit more, but it'll take too long now. Great. And then let's please go back to the text, what we've been talking about, just to remind you, just to remember. Right now, we're looking at, of course, how does the I exist? The I that appears to us, very important. We're not talking about the conventional I here, because that doesn't appear to us. Well, if it appears to us mixed with an inherently existing I. So for us, the I is really the inherently existing I, because that's how it appears. And therefore, let's now check if such an I exists. Well, that's the first step. First of all, identify or check, does such a self, like how does it appear to me in different situations? And once we determine that, which is called the identifying the object of negation, well, to become aware, if that self exists, it can only exist in relation to mind and body, obviously. And if it does so, well, either it's one with mind and body, or it's separate from mind and body. There's no other option. There's no other way in which it could exist. All right. Therefore, having determined that, the first of these two. And the question is now, what is more absurd? What is of those two options? Both are absurd. Is it totally one with mind and body or totally separate? Now, interestingly, if there were an inherently existent I, and it were to be hypothetically, if there are only these two options, so it would exist as inherently separate from mind and body. That would be more absurd than being one with the aggregates. I mean, they're both absurd, but it would be more absurd to believe, because that would mean it exists totally separate. You could remove mind and body and would still be there with an I, something solidly there. And actually it would follow that the I is like totally independent, that the I is over there and the mind are over here, and well, mind and body are over here, and that really would make sense. It's kind of less absurd that the I is the aggregates. This is why also the Buddhist philosophers who do not accept inherent existence, well, they understand there's only these two options. So if something existed, the I existed inherently, it's either one with the aggregates or separate from the aggregates. In the sense that, well, the I has to be the aggregates. Why? Because what does it mean? What does it mean if something exists inherently? Well, in the end, you'll find something coming from the side of the object. There's really some essence there that you can point at and saying, that's the person. When I look for the person. So when you see mind and body, and look at mind and body, your own mind and body. And so then, well, if there's really an inherently existent I, and the I is not just labeled, then the referent object, that which you're applying the label I to, there must be something there other than it just being labeled. So there must be really something there from the side of the aggregates we can call the I. And so we have this whole explanation of body and mind both, or just the mind. That's the answer some of the philosophers give. So none of them says something separate. The I exists separate. So we can hear from that, what is the worst option? What's most absurd? The I existed separately from mind and body. Okay? But actually, from a Prasangika school point of view, conventionally, it's separate, like it's different, but not inherently different, not disconnectedly different. So it's not the same as mind and body, but also not totally separate. But as you remember, these two options can be given there's only these two options. Actually, there is a third option if the I doesn't exist inherently. But if the I exists inherently, there is no third option. And you've heard me say that before, because then the I would actually have its own existence in that it's already an I. It doesn't depend. It's already a self. It doesn't need to depend on anything to be that I. And therefore, if it were separate from mind and body, well, it had its own entity. It doesn't need mind and body to exist because it's intrinsically already an I. And therefore, it has that independent existence. And so it couldn't be linked to mind and body the way the Prasangika presents the I. Merely labeled I, which is merely labeled on the basis of mind and body, and it's inseparably linked to mind and body, but nevertheless different, not identical. So there's this third option that is only possible once you accept a merely labeled I. Okay. So I hope this part becomes clearer as we go along. Actually, one part that Jimmy also mentioned, I may just say this now and I'll address this question more a little deeper next time, but he says he gets overwhelmed by the reasonings set forth in this text. I just remember now. And yes, you definitely get overwhelmed. But that is the nature of this text. So just had that. Let's remember this part of his question. And I think this is important for everyone, because really what this text does, it bombards you with words, terminology that is new, and ideas that are new. But this is a very advanced text, of course. And when we talk about emptiness, it's a matter of going deeper, which means you don't study new texts again and again and again and again. That's more an extensive way of studying about something. But here it's more about going deeper. So you have a text that contains all the different reasonings, explicitly or implicitly, and instead of now letting this text go and just study something new, you study the same text over and over. In that, you study it once, maybe with a teacher or with, I don't know, with a Dharma friend or whatever. And then that text, you go over it, you won't let it go. In that, over and over, you read it again and again, you think about it, etc. And who's showing us to do this? His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He mentions this many times. His Holiness very often says, I have Chandakirti's text and the auto commentary that Chandakirti composed. He composed a commentary on this text, his own commentary explaining the verses. Hasn't, unfortunately, well, it has been translated to English, actually. There's a draft available. If you're interested, I can actually also make it available to you. I think it's available to anyone. Anyway, this self-commentary and the root text itself, they're on his desk, he says. So I can assume here His Holiness has a desk he sits on when he does his reading the scriptures, reflecting on the scriptures, manifesting in that way. If he's a fully enlightened Buddha, he doesn't need to do so, but it still manifests in that way for our benefit. And he always says, I go over this again and again and again. So His Holiness shows us this is one of the main texts to understand emptiness. And this should be something you read over and over again. And every time you read it, you go deeper, your understanding deepens. Well, for the time being, you may just focus on one aspect or two, and be patient with yourself, not understanding everything. Okay, just to mention this. So you're bombarded now here with selflessness. You're bombarded, basically. But all right. As I said just now, what I mentioned was the two options that are mentioned in this context. If the I existed really the way it appears to us, well, being totally separate from mind and body, that is more absurd than is the second option, that is one with the body. Anyway, we covered already the option of the self-existing separate from mind and body, as part of also introducing some of the non-Buddhist philosophical systems in India, who basically asserted such a self. And in that context, we spoke about the absurdity of that. And now we deal with the self being the aggregates. And that's less absurd. But as I just said, it's important because these philosophers here, the Buddhist philosophers other than the Prasangika school, they very much understand if something exists inherently, that is, if the vase has some existence from the side of the vase, should be able to find it, obviously, should be able to find something. And if that's true for the I, more important than for the vase, because we're definitely always more attached to the I than we are attached to a vase. Therefore, when it comes to the I, we should be able to posit something that is the I. All five aggregates seems fine when first hearing it. Mental consciousness also seems fine because it's the main aggregate. Definitely, it's in charge of everything else. It's the most important aggregate in that it's the continuum. Its continuation goes on to the next life. It's the only aggregate that's still active. The mental consciousness, the sense consciousnesses are gone. The body is no longer connected to the mental consciousness, but that continues on, of course, with the mental factor of feeling and discernment, which also part of the five aggregates. But the point is really the mental consciousness saying that is the I is that which you find, makes a lot of sense. What is very difficult for the philosophers other than the Prasangika, The eye is okay, but what do you find when you find a vase? You don't have a mental consciousness of a vase. A vase doesn't have a mental consciousness. What about a car? I mean, if there's something inherently if the car exists inherently, there must be something from the side of the object, because otherwise the car can't exist. And I want you to meditate, do the meditation. It's so important to do the meditation, because you will come to that point possibly that you feel, I understand why those philosophical systems, other than the Prasangika, insist there must be something there. Because if you take apart a car and you take apart, I don't know, pillow, and you end up just having these subtle atoms and subatomic particles, you may ask yourself, how come one is a car and can do what it can do, and one is a pillow, when really the basic structures are these subatomic particles? So there must be something there from the side of the object that distinguishes the particles of a car from the particles of a pillow. Okay? We reach that point because otherwise it feels to us there's something there out of nothing. There's this very intricate world where you can clearly differentiate between car, cloud, food, drink, sound. But if you don't find anything from the side of the object, how come this intricate world is really there? How can that exist if it's merely labeled? It seems like we're creating this world out of nothing. And there's a natural tendency when you really meditate in the way prescribed and you don't let go and you go deeper onto this level, well, there's nothing to be found, the sense, but there must be something there. And that's when you understand where the lower schools, other than the Prasangika school, comes from. And so they now have to posit what it is. What is it? What is that? What is that thing that distinguishes the pillow from the car, for instance? With the eye, as I said, you can point at the mental consciousness. That seems to be all right, but you can't point at anything when it comes to cars and pillows and so forth. I mean, some philosophical systems may say there's some smallest particle that's different from the smallest particle that makes up the car. So the pillow's smallest particle is different. But actually, modern science wouldn't agree with that. You can further divide it, further divide it, further divide it. And at some level, I mean, at least mentally divide it, what is the difference between those two? That then once you have a coming together of all these smallest particles to form a pillow on one hand, and a car on the other hand, accounts for this huge difference between the two of them in terms of their function, their appearance, and so forth. Anyway. All right, sorry, that was a little bit maybe too extensive, and I hope I didn't confuse you. So the point I'm trying to make is we're here discussing the possibility now the I is the mental consciousness as described by the lower systems. But one thought I had, which is when we think, so it's really, really complicated. We have to deal with the way the I appears to ourselves. And we have to deal with the way in which the I could exist. How would it make sense to us? Not just from the point of view of appearance, but how it would make sense to us when we think about it. So there's a lot to really deal with. And what's even more difficult is that the I doesn't always appear in the same way to us. Sometimes there are times when we very strongly do identify with one of the aggregates, like the body, for instance, that we feel our body defines us in terms of our outer appearance. So there's sometimes it's not a very, it's not, I'm not even sure we feel that the I is the body, but the I is very strongly defined by the body. And sometimes it seems to be more the mind, maybe our mental failure. But that's also something to watch, that it doesn't always appear in the same way, but there seems to be something there. That's for sure. That's for sure. All right. Now, having said all this, let's go back to the verse we got to last time, where we can show it on the screen. I think it was verse, what was it? Verse 129. All right, 129, I think it was. No, there's no fault because the instance share same continuity. Oh no, actually the last we did was 128. That was the last.
128.
128. That's right, 128. The first argument here, it's saying, well, 27, we finished kind of 27, and then there's 28. We kind of went through them, but just quickly to remind you, because those reasonings are difficult. Now, if the aggregates are mind and body, or actually that's the lower school. So to say the I is all the aggregates, that's really difficult. As we've had to say it's all the aggregates, whatever happens to the I has to happen to all the aggregates. That's already really difficult. And we learn later on in the text, it goes on to say, we talk about the I being the protector, the witness, and so forth, but not all the aggregates are the protector or the witness. That doesn't make sense. Now, it's then, of all the options given, mental consciousness makes most sense. Okay, so anyway, if the aggregates are the self, if they really are the self, then of course we end up with many, many selves because there are many aggregates. That's just the first reasoning. So taking all 5 into account. But then it goes very quickly to say, well, if it's the mental consciousness, if really the mental consciousness were the I, according to the lower schools, and I've mentioned this before, and maybe it's a little easier if I say it now again, according to the schools other than the Prasangika, they would say mental consciousness is not an imputed phenomenon, but it's a substantially existent phenomenon. The lower schools say some things are imputed and some things are not. Prasangika would say everything is imputed. But in the lower schools, the person that we see, okay, that person is imputed. But the self that we find, in particular the mental consciousness, that is not imputed. That exists substantially, in that you can identify this without having to depend on its parts. You don't need to depend on its parts because you identify it without having to depend on anything. It's just you identify it the way it is. Whereas with the person, you need to depend on the mind or the body, like the imputed person who we can see. This person, so not the essence that you find, that's the mental consciousness, that's the real person, but the mere imputed person that they have to posit. So that imputed person that we talk about when we say, oh, I see Jim, for instance. Well, I don't see his mental consciousness, so I see the imputed Jim. All right. So that Jim, that is the imputed one, but the actual Jim is the mental consciousness. So, but the problem with that is the mental consciousness is substantially existent. And the lower schools say that there is no substantially existent self-sufficient I. So they're actually contradicting themselves in saying the mental consciousness is the I, but there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent I. That's one problem here. So the self would be substantial. Viewing it would not be an error to perceive a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, because doing so would pertain to a substantial reality. All right, so you believe the I is the substantially existent phenomenon. It's not imputed. The I, the actual I, that which you find, is that mental consciousness. So that would contradict this view in terms of substantially existent and imputed existence. Okay, of course, the Svatantika school, for instance, which is just one school below the Prasangika school, they would say, well, there's these two I's, the substantial and the imputed I. And when we say there's no substantially existent self-sufficient I, we mean the imputed I. But I mean, come on, you have two I's. It's kind of like, well, it's a little odd. It makes things more complicated, as I said before, because everything becomes, there's so many contradictions. You have to kind of account for these contradictions. But not just that. If the self existed inherently, again, it would be independent. And that would mean if it's independently and at the same time it's mind and body, well, first of all, if mind and body are gone at the time of nirvana, because you no longer have this mind and body, well, the I would be gone as well. Because the idea of a continuum of an I does not work if the I exists inherently. Okay, if the I exists inherently, we went through this as part of verse 60, 61 of this text here. Well, this idea that if the I exists inherently, and you still insist that the I exists inherently, but it continues on moment by moment, well, moment by moment, it would be a totally different I, because it's self-sufficient, self-sustaining. It's not that there's moments of I that are merely labeled. No, there are these solid, independently existent I, so they were totally separate from one another. And if mind and body, if you say on top of that, it exists inherently and it's mind and body, well, when this mind and body, this is the I, and that is gone when you reach nirvana, new mind and body arise, of course, but they're not the I. And continuum doesn't make sense. So when you, as it says 28, when you reach nirvana, there's no longer an I. And then even before nirvana, if moment by moment the I stops to exist, well, then in each moment is a totally separate I, so that the actions one I accumulates in the past will not be experienced by the same person. So what do I care? Tomorrow's I is a totally different person. It doesn't feel that way, right? It doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way at all. That's in contradiction to the world, that it's actually a totally separate I. However, if it were inherently existent, it would be just its own self-sustaining entity. And then it would be out of existence and a new I would just pop up. How is that even possible? But anyway, so therefore it says with no agent, none of its effect could be. So prior to nirvana, self would rise and vanish every instant, and there'd be just these separate eyes. And karma, well, one person accumulates karma and a totally different one reaps the result. That's 128. Then 129 goes on to say, well, you may say there is no fault because the instants share the same continuity. Okay, 129 A and C. Yes, you may say there's no fault because the instants share the same continuity, or share the same continuity. So what continuity? What are you talking about, continuity? Right? I mean, continuity, what does that even mean? That we label, actually, in actuality, there's something changing all the time. It's this fluid thing. And on the basis of that fluidity, because I have this, non-static phenomenon that's changing all the time, as part of the convention, we label, I don't know, I or cow, what have you, based on the body, based on a certain mind. Or let's take the sprout or the seed. The seed, for a while, there are moments, just atoms coming together and changing and changing and changing. And based on that, the way those appear to us, we label seed. And since a seed must have certain functions, certain characteristics, when they're no longer gotten there, we now call it sprout. Okay, so moment by moment, it's not the same, but we label on the basis of that those appearances, and that's okay, because from the side of the object, it's neither a seed nor a sprout. Okay, but if it existed inherently as a seed, it wouldn't need labeling. It would be in and of itself a seed. But if then I still insist it's changing moment by moment, it's not like one moment would turn into the next. That would be impossible, because it doesn't become anything. It doesn't depend on anything. It's just either there or not there at all. And there wouldn't be any connection between an earlier moment and a later moment, because it would be self-sustaining and independently existent. So what is that continuum you're talking about? It's kind of like, I don't know, like you have like a mala with different beads, and these beads would be these moments in time, totally separate. and you kind of cover it with a sock or something, like the continuum you put over this, like a tube that you put it in, and that's the continuum. There's no continuum. There's just separate moments. There's no continuum. It doesn't make sense. That's a little difficult to understand. If you have independent moments of existence, you can't have a continuum. What continuum? Because not one moment becomes the next moment and so forth. Okay, so but we've already shown through analysis the defects of such continua. Therefore, the aggregates in the mind cannot be the self. Okay, if you believe mind and body are the I exists inherently. Continuum, you don't have a continuum. And that was already discussed in verse 61 as part of the 6th chapter in particular. It would be like each moment is like you have Leora here and Shacha on the other hand. And just as they are totally separate and they're not a continuum, likewise, these moments of the I, if they existed inherently, would be like these totally separate entities. Okay? Therefore, the self cannot be the mind. So the aggregates and the mind cannot be the self, as that which is found from the side of the object. Okay. All right. Then, there's one more sentence, the last line. The world is finite and so on have not been declared. All right. What does that say? Well, we've just had, first of all, a continuum is impossible. And of course, the I, it would be going out of existence from moment to moment. So there would be just a short I just for a moment, and then it'd be totally gone, and a new one would pop up. There's no continuum. But actually, when mind and body, I mean, the way they're right now at nirvana, there's a huge transformation. So there really wouldn't be any I any longer. Where would that new I come from? Okay. And of course, the Buddha himself has not said that there is an end to the self. So here it says the world. The world is really, well, the person. I mean, what is the world to me? The world to me, my existence, is what I perceive with my mind and body. So really my 5 aggregates is my world. Through them I perceive other things, but again, filtered through my own mind. And so here really the world refers to me as an entity. Now, if the I existed inherently, there would be an end. There would be a total end to this I, but it continues endlessly. Mind, body, I, they continue on endlessly, which is why the Buddha did never say that there's an end to the self. Now, what does Chandrakirti mention here? This is something that's really important. An aspect that's important as part of the Buddhist philosophy, and you're probably familiar with it, you probably heard of it, that the Buddha, there were certain questions that were asked, directed at the Buddha. The Buddha was asked a few questions, and the Buddha didn't really answer. And there was a very good reason for the Buddha not doing so. Actually, there's different ways in which the Buddha would teach. In particular, well, different ways as in like responding to a question. Okay, so a lot of the dialogues, the teachings the Buddha gave, they were given in response to a question. Okay, so a question was asked. Of course, it shows that the Buddha taught according to the needs of students. There's a question there. So according to the needs of this other person asking the questions, the people being there, the Buddha gave a teaching. But in different ways. Sometimes he gave an answer in a very straightforward fashion, right? Just answered straightforwardly. And other times he would just kind of clarify or qualify a certain response another person gave. So if one said something, the Buddha would then modify whatever was said. That would be another way to answer. Another option, another way in which the Buddha taught was, for instance, he would ask a counter question. I mean, instead of answering, answer a counter question. So if you think this, well, how about such and such? To allow the person maybe to find an answer themselves. And then lastly, sometimes he would not answer at all. So in certain contexts, that happened. And there are 14 questions that are mentioned in the Madhyamika system, in the Madhyamika school, mentioned 14 questions that the Buddha didn't answer. So those 14 questions you also find in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. So the question is the world, does the person, will there be an end to the person? Will there be an end to the world? And he didn't say yes or no. Then is the world not finite? So is the world finite? Didn't answer. Is the world not finite? Didn't answer. Is the world both finite and not finite? And is the world neither finite nor? He didn't answer. Because anytime, with regard to any of these questions, the Buddha knew if he said this, they would misunderstand this way. If he said something else, they would misunderstand in another way. I mean, here, if the world is finite, if you were to say this, the correct answer would be, of course, the world is not finite. Conventionally, the I continues on. But if you'd said the I will continue on, for someone who believes in inherent existence, they would have held on to an inherent, truly existent I that continues on. And of course, it would just in that moment enhance holding on to an I. If he had said the I is not finite, as in like it will cease to exist, well, that would make sense. Why would you become enlightened if someday you just totally go out of existence? And anyway, that's not reality. So yeah, if you look at these questions, like it kind of makes sense that the Buddha didn't say anything, as in like depending, of course, on the person. So then also the Tathagata, another question was, did the Tathagata exist after his death? Didn't answer. Does he exist or does he not exist? If he had said he continues on, again, in a sense, the Buddha is permanent. If he'd said, well, it doesn't go on, well, that wouldn't be correct because the mental continuum would just stop. I mean, you'd attain enlightenment and your mental continuum would be gone because you can still label the Buddha on the basis of the mental consciousness, and the mental consciousness continues. So you continuously label on the basis of the mental consciousness and the way the Buddha manifests also physically, you still continue to talk about the Buddha. So actually the Buddha continues on, because if he didn't, well, we become enlightened and you go out of existence. So you're just there for a few years and that's it. And now it doesn't make sense. So anyway, whichever way, and to say he's both or neither, again, no. So he didn't say anything. And then another question. So those are already 4 questions. 4, 8. The Tathagata. Is the world finite or not? Oh, is the world eternal? Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that. So the world is it permanent or impermanent? Finite and not finite? And is the world eternal and impermanent? So world can also not just refer to mind and body, but also world in the sense of, well, this world that we live in. Okay, so first, I seem to remember it refers to the I, and then later world also like this world we live in. And again, is there an end to it or not? Okay. And then of course with the Buddha, I just mentioned it. And also, is the body the life force? Life force here means the I. Is the body the I, or is the body a thing that is different? And again, in certain contexts, the Buddha didn't answer. Okay. So therefore, saying that, well, whichever way the Buddha answered, it would be misunderstood. But here he is basically, Chandrakirti is saying, well, he definitely didn't answer to the question, is the world finite? Because, well, that would actually support inherent existence. It wouldn't make sense. And it would, here in the context of the I just mentioned those 14 kind of what do you call it? Like they're called the neutral views in Tibetan, or the views, the questions, sorry, the 14 questions that the Buddha didn't give an answer to. So here with regard to if inherent existence. So what does he say here in verse 129 as part of the argument? If the I existed inherently, if the body, the mind existed inherently, well, then there would be an end to the I. But the Buddha never said the world is finite. He didn't answer, but the not answering in itself was a teaching to show that there are these two extremes, and there is this middle in between, that conventionally the world is not finite. Sorry, yeah, the world is not finite. In fact, it's infinite. Okay. I hope this made it a little bit clearer. And then the next verse, still assuming that the aggregates are the I. Okay, so now Prasangika school says, well, what is your assertion? Your assertion is that inherent existence and existence are the same, and that the I is mind and body. But here, if that's true, when the yogi sees the truth of no self, if the yogi looks for the I, he won't find anything. Let's face it, he won't find anything. So what is he finding? According to you, the non-existence of the self. According to you, it's the non-existence of the self. And if the self is mind and body, what does the yogi find? The non-existence of mind and body. So the yogi would actually end up not finding anything. So actually the yogi would, if phenomena existed inherently, that means if inherent existence and existence were the same, and a yogi were to apply logic, were to look for the I mean, he's not going to find it. He just isn't going to find anything. So if he doesn't find anything, and that is the ultimate way to or the ultimate truth, basically what he finds is the ultimate truth, and he doesn't find anything, if that's according to you non-existence, right? Inherent existence and existence are the same. So if you find non-inherent existence, you find the non-existence of the I. So the yogi denies the I, and if the I is mind and body, he denies the existence of all phenomena. So you end up having nothing there. That is the extreme that you end up with if phenomena existed inherently, and the I in particular being mind and body. If now the other person says, well, no, the yogi does not negate what you just said, like the lack of mind and body. No, what does the yogi realize? When the yogi realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena, what he does is the non-existence of the eternal self. He realizes the non-existence of a permanent self. That's what he realizes. So if someone were to respond in that way. So if you say it is the eternal self that has been negated, has been negated as the yogi negating that, then for you the aggregates of mind cannot constitute the self, because you're refuting an eternal I and not the aggregates. Well, then if you refute the I, what about mind and body? The I is not mind and body, because you're refuting only permanent I. You're not refuting permanent mind and body. Can you still follow me with this argument? I hope you can still. It's kind of like in the form of a debate that someone responds to what Chandrakirti says. Sometimes it's not necessarily another person kind of responding, but I don't know whether it's actually, but when Chandrakirti wrote this down, he was, I don't know, maybe testing his arguments and someone argued in that way and he added it to the text, or whether he came up with it. There was no one arguing along these lines, but he kind of mentioned, well, if someone were to say, then that is what follows. So he tries to be very thorough here, to take any possibility. And that is very typical for our mind, actually. So these other people who respond, if someone says this, the other says that, I think it's symbolic also for our mind, because when we start analyzing, our mind comes up with ideas. It doesn't want to let go of inherent existence. So maybe it's this, or maybe it's that, holding on to something so just that we can come up with things exist in the way they actually appear to us. All right. So here, first, this argument is, well, if you really look for, so the 130, if you really look for the self, you don't find something, that means you find non-existence of the self, and you find the non-existence of mind and body, because according to you, the self is mind and body, and what you find is the non-existence. And then secondly, if someone says, well, no, but the yogi really understands that there's no eternal I, well, then that's what you realize, then the I is not mind. So you're basically saying the yogi just negates an eternal I, but you're not saying the yogi is negating an eternal aggregates, like eternal mind and body. You're not saying that. So that means the I is not mind and body, because there's a different self. Okay. This means, therefore, according to you, 131. Oh gosh. Oh wow. Sorry. I'm totally lost sense of time. I thought I still had lots of time. My apologies. Okay, that should be enough then for now. I mean, we're at this point right now. It's a little bit difficult, I'm aware. What would help for next time, definitely, and you probably have done that already, but read through the arguments. What follows is a little difficult. Now for a few verses, it's slightly difficult. But then we come, of course, to the argument, which is the argument of the 7 extremes, the chariot, and so forth, and hopefully it becomes a little easier. All right, but let's leave it for now. And of course, as usual, do a brief meditation. Right? And so we start, as we usually do, with letting go of any disruptive thoughts, just focusing on the breath for some time to be ready for the analysis. Now let's start by allowing the object of negation, that is the I, the way it appears to us, the inherent I. Become aware of that. Sense that there is something there. Something that can be found in our mind and body. That's called I. Since it would be more upset that it existed separate from mind and body, Let's allow the possibility that the I, mental consciousness, the sense the I can be found, well, let's assume find mental consciousness. Mental consciousness are the self existed inherently each moment would be totally separate from the next. So the mental karma accumulated now will be experienced totally disconnected mind. Because each moment of mind be completely disconnected. As each moment would be self-sustaining. And so the yogi were to search for an essence well, actually, you would neither find mind nor body. As even the mind can be further subdivided. In moments of minds. Different functions of the mind, and so forth. And if a yogi can't find anything, that would mean the yogi would have just established the non-existence of the I. Since non-inherent existence and non-existence are the same. Are the self or the aggregates. And if the yogi has established the non-existence of the I, well, he's also established the non-existence of the mental consciousness. Since the I is the mental consciousness. And if he had, the yogi had merely negated a permanent I and nothing else, well, then the I wouldn't be the aggregates. For otherwise, if you negate a permanent I, you would negate permanent aggregates. So now to conclude this short analysis, see whether you can come to the conclusion that I cannot be the aggregates either. Instead, it's merely labeled without any existence from its own side. And single-pointedly focus your mind on that. And thus, spend a moment of just letting go. The I that we're so worried about, whose success, popularity, well-being is in the center of our life. See whether we can just spend a moment to let go. That I and that which is mine. Finally, let's dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated. May this become a cause, first of all, for great spiritual masters, the lamas, to have a very long life and continue inspiring to teach us. And may, of course, become one of the causes necessary for ourselves to attain the enlightened state of the Buddha. So that we're the greatest benefit to all sentient beings. May also benefit sentient beings right here and right now, that our virtue may bring them more peace of mind, more happiness. May I help those who are sick, like Tali Lubin, those who are losing their freedom, the people in Afghanistan right now, and other places in this world. And of course, in the way Shantideva says in his prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored in finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Right, that's it. Sorry, I'll leave it only a little bit longer. But of course, to remind you once again, I spent quite some time on the person who's our relationship with other people, but of course, as you're aware, it's part of more of an equal attitude towards others. So to really spend some time with the people we have a hard time with and allow that healthy distance. Sometimes people are just too close in terms of this attachment we have towards them, or this negative emotions we have towards them. So to allow this healthy distance to grow within us, and to have more of an equal sense of importance with regard to all sentient beings, importance in terms of having benefited us equally different times and so forth, benefiting us just through their presence, of course, and having equal potential to become fully enlightened, and our relationships just being temporary closeness and so forth. So let's make an effort going through this, but of course generating bodhicitta again and again. All right, so have a lovely week. Be well, stay safe, and see you next week.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
the
you.
whole day. Thank you.